Baik, Bapak Ibu, kita mulai acaranya. Karena teman-teman yang di online sudah siap juga, baik narasumber maupun peserta. Okay, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning for all participants around the world. Thank you for participating to this event. It's very important moment for us to. This is time for C20, especially anti-corruption working group, to deliver or to submit our policy priority issue to anti-corruption working group C20, and also invite the comments, response from B20, from university, and from some friend from other engagement group. Thank you for Ibu Kartika, who representing Pak Muhammad Hadiana, chair of the anti-corruption working group C20, and also Pak Roliansah, Pak Haryanto Budiman from B20, Pak Roliansah from Foreign Ministry, and also chair of the anti-corruption working group G20, and also our colleagues Mayra Martini from Transparency International Secretariat in Berlin. My colleagues, our colleague also Immanuel Bria from EITI International, and Pak Wisnu Yuwono from Indonesian University. Thank also to Blair, our co-chair, Anti-Corruption Working Group C20. He is Executive Director of Accountability Lab, and he will provide, or we will deliver or present our priority issue to all of us. And thank you also for our colleagues, Anti-Corruption Working Group C20 also, Ilham Muhammad from the Secretariat. And my appreciation to all Anti-Corruption Working Group C20 members around the world. We have a member came from 27 countries. And finally, thanks to C20 and all colleagues who have provided technical support for this meeting. The meeting will be, the discussion will be hosted by my friend from Indonesia.
Check. Okay. Thank you, Mas Dadang, for the opening remarks. I think we can continue. Okay, it's running out of battery. Okay, yeah, I think we can proceed to our main event in this evening. Mas Dadang have presented or guide us to enter the main event, and also already told us what the first in session is. And first of all, I would also like to greet our friends, which will be presenting the priority issue from the Anti-Corruption Working Group C20, Blair Glencourse, the International Coordinator of C20, joining in online, and also Mayra Martini, joining on online from Transparency International Secretariat, also Emmanuel Bria, also joining in online from EITI International. And coming in offline here in Jakarta, Indonesia, we have Pak Rolyansyah Sumirat, the chair of Anti-Corruption Working Group G20, and then also Bu Kartika, representative of the G20, also Pak Haryanto Budiman, the chair of Task Force Integrity and Compliance B20, and then Pak Wisnu Juwono, scholars, also academia from University of Indonesia. And I myself, maybe I have to introduce myself first. I'm Lalola Ister, but you can call me Lola. I am from Indonesia Corruption Watch and will be moderating today's discussion in this session. So without further ado, I think I will hand over the opportunity to Blair. Blair, can you hear us clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Blair, you have 10 minutes to deliver or presenting the priority issue from the Anti-Corruption Working Group C20. Over to you, Blair.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here. Thanks again to Dadang and Ilham, my co-chairs in the Anti-Corruption Working Group, and to all of the C20 Anti-Corruption Working Group team in Indonesia, and also to my colleague Sanjita, who is here on the call as well, who put a lot of work into the coordination of inputs for this working paper. I will briefly run over some of the key messages and ideas in the paper, and then I look forward to feedback and additional conversation with our panelists. As we all know, the G20 has repeatedly expressed commitments to combat corruption over the course of the last several years, but we really this year wanted to place an emphasis on implementation of these commitments and holding the G20 to account for these commitments over time. There have been a lot of communiques, there have been high-level principles, there's been reporting questionnaires. Now we really want to reiterate the need for the G20 to improve implementation of its commitments through target setting and reporting. So matching commitments with goals and timelines and reports in the right formats and in a transparent way, through building a culture of learning amongst G20 countries around anti-corruption issues, so that we can understand where there have been successes and failures and what we can learn from those. We want to emphasize greater engagement with all of us and with civil society around the world. I think we would argue the process needs to be more transparent, it needs to be more timely. We want to continue to make sure that civil society has the opportunity to engage in the formal G20 meetings. And we want to improve oversight and monitoring of the G20 anti-corruption commitments, which is something that we have been working on with some other organizations to build out a learning tool to ensure that this takes place. So the 5 key priority issues that we are suggesting that the G20 takes action on this year. Let me run through those quickly and some of the ideas that we're suggesting within them. The first is anti-money laundering and asset recovery. This is not a new issue. We all know how important this is. the G20 has talked about these issues previously, but we want to recommend in particular the G20 countries expand anti-money laundering and counter-financing of terrorism obligations to non-financial businesses and professions, so gatekeepers in particular. We want to ensure commitment to the introduction of legislation that details civil recovery powers. We'd like to suggest that G20 countries changing corporation laws to prohibit corporations operating in the international financial system from listing independent incorporators or attorney incorporators as shareholders and nominees. We'd like to address G20 countries to address de-risking and debanking of non-profit organizations. And finally, ensure faster, wider, and more effective use of mutual legal assistance. The second big key issue that we focused on this year is beneficial ownership transparency. Again, a big and important piece of the anti-corruption work around the world these days. And we have another 5 specific recommendations related to defining and committing global standards on beneficial ownership transparency. Mandating beneficial ownership laws include information on the different people involved in the creation and maintenance of trusts, measures to implement and verify data related to beneficial owners and the legal entities that own companies, the adoption and championing of international standards for beneficial ownership information, and finally, additional transparency requirements for state-owned enterprises, including beneficial ownership disclosures in line with the UNODC Oslo Statement on Corruption. The third big theme that we focused on is countering corruption in the energy transition. This is a big, important issue, of course, given climate change and some of the issues we see with the amount of money flowing into alternative energies. And we'd like to recommend to the G20 that they align their efforts in this respect with best practices, for example, in the infrastructure and extractive sectors, to ensure transparency and accountability of energy contracts. We want to support them to extend screening and due diligence requirements in things like mining supply chains, to ensure that the clean energy transition takes place responsibly. We'd like the G20 to regulate lobbying activities around these issues. We'd like to support independent civil society monitoring of large-scale energy projects through integrity pacts and other similar vehicles. And finally, establish effective and constructive feedback channels within and across government with industry, business, civil society, and affected communities in particular, to ensure that decisions are made in a fair and equitable way. The fourth big issue is open contracting. Again, something that we've talked about previously within the G20 and the C20 anti-corruption working groups. We'd like to recommend that the G20 strengthen the role of audit institutions to report and investigate corruption in procurement. We'd like to push the G20 to build the capacity of government auditors and associated supervision and enforcement agencies. We'd like the G20 to increase public participation and education on anti-corruption issues, strengthen the open data infrastructure and ensuring open data across the whole cycle of procurement and contracting, from planning to contract to award to implementation. And finally, encourage international financial institutions like the IMF and the multilateral investment bank, development banks, to support whole cycle procurement transparency. And then finally, on transparency and integrity of corporations, we would encourage the G20 to ensure that all member countries are party to the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention and that private sector bribery is criminalized. We'd like to ensure that regulations that govern revolving doors are in place in G20 countries to reduce favoritism and bias. We'd like to mandate that large corporations investigate, mitigate, and report on corruption risk along the entire supply chain. We'd like to enable information sharing about public-private partnerships to tackle financial crime. And finally, we'd like to push the G20 to ensure that corporations adopt high-quality corporate integrity mechanisms, such as codes of ethics, whistleblowing mechanisms, and the like. So those were the broad suggestions that we made in our policy paper. I will leave it there, and looking forward to any feedback and ideas and suggestions as to how we can make sure that these recommendations are implemented. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Blair, joining online with us here. And as for the next session, for tonight's agenda, we have our panelists joining online, both online and offline, 6 of them. I would like to give the first opportunity over to Pak Rolyansyah Sumirat to give response to what Blair have presented from the C20 ends. You have 5 minutes, Pak Rolyansyah, and the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Lola, for giving me the floor. First, let me thank the representative from the C20 for inviting us to be here during the meeting. Practically, we are trying to returning the favor, Pak Dadang, since you are already involved with the G20 activities even from day one, when the G20 anti-corruption working group held its first meeting on April, on May, and then the second one on July, a couple of months ago. So practically, it is time for the G20 representative to return the favor and to practically maybe to make ourselves available to anything that practically you might try to offer or you might try to suggest to G20. I'm here also together with Ibu Kartika from the Indonesian Anti-Corruption Commissions as the co-chair, Indonesian co-chairs of the Anti-Corruption Working Group. Maybe we will share some more time, little bit with regard to the activities that we have already conducted. But if I may just try to directly go into the the issues now. And of course, thank you very much for the presentations, Blair. Point taken. So many suggestions coming from the C20 that practically already in line with the activities that now discuss or issues discussed broadly in the G20. Let me give you an example. When we are talking about anti-money laundering and asset recovery, one of your main focus on the recommendations, this is also actually something that practically very dear and very near to our heart in the G20 delegations. And even one of the priority of the G20 anti-corruption working group under Indonesian presidency is connected to this particular issue, where when we are trying to give specific focus on anti-money laundering connected to the legal professions. We are in the process of gathering some kind of compendium of good practices for supervisory measures and regulatory framework on legal professional to mitigate corruption-related money laundering risk. Why we need to emphasize on this particular issue? Because we understand it's not only our colleague from banking sector that need to have some kind of strict measures about background checking, due diligence, but practically all type of sectors should also undergo similar activities, due diligence and background checks. So this is something that already in line when we are talking about anti-money laundering and asset recovery. Another issue that you focus on your recommendation is about beneficial ownership transparency. This is also something that's still connected to the money laundering side of the equations when we are discussing it in the framework of anti-corruption working group. There is a broad understanding among G20 members that if there is some kind of increase or more development measures with regard to the transparency connected to the beneficial ownership, it will directly give a positive tone to the overall activities when we are talking about combating money laundering. And of course, in this regard, the issue of data exchange is something that is going to be very needed. Of course, when we are talking about data exchange, it will be something that is needed by our law enforcement sector dealing with this particular issue. And I think I'm not exaggerating when I mentioned that this particular issue is not only shared by 1 or 2 countries from the G20 members, but practically almost all delegation emphasizing on the similar, tone about the necessity to have this kind of issue to be brought up in a more, robust manner. A little bit from the Indonesian side, we are also trying to make sure this particular issue of beneficial ownership to be highlighted a little bit more, because we also want to make sure that we are still in line with some other international standards, including those that has already been set up by FATF, since actually Indonesia is the only G20 country that hasn't been part of the FATF. We are in the process. Even only a couple of weeks ago, we have some kind of team from FATF came to Indonesia to finalize our applications. And then there is another 2 issues that I will ask Ibu Kartika to present, which is with regard to the issue of energy transitions. This is also connected to our activities, and also maybe on the open contracting, something connected to the public participation issue. And I need to emphasize that the issue of public participation and anti-corruption educations is something that is going to be one of the highlight of activities by the anti-corruption working group of G20. But before I conclude, I also need to maybe re-inform, if I may say so, about the agreement that we have already reached in the working group of G20, which is we have already agreed on the high-level principle on enhancing the role of auditing in tackling corruptions. It's not Indonesia, it's the collective achievement by the G20 members through this particular working group that we managed to agree on the set of high-level principle when we are talking about the direct linkage between the role of audit and the efforts to combat corruptions. There are several principles that is already agreed, from supporting the role of auditing bodies itself, strengthening the role of capacity of supreme audit institutions, develop robust national framework, and so on, including even promoting the use of ICT, something that need to be also highlighted. So I think maybe I will conclude there, and I will give the floor a little bit with your permission, Mbak Lola, to Ibu Kartika to highlight 2 more focus from your recommendation that connected to the activities of the working group.
Thank you, Pak Roy, and thank you, Mbak Lola, and good evening, all participants online. Actually, we are very happy that C20 Anti-Corruption Working Group is also picking up the issues of energy transition. This is in line with our priority, as Pak Roy mentioned, and we try as an Indonesian presidency. This is the first time the Anti-Corruption Working Group discuss this issue. So it is it is the beginning, and as the presidency, we are trying to push the group to have a background note, which is which will serve as a foundation for the direction where the Anti-Corruption Working Group will discuss on, and what measures or what roadmap should we take. So this will be a very important document, and we thank the civil society for picking up this issue as well. And rest assured that we should not stop during Indonesia presidency, and that thus, as the government side, we also request all relevant stakeholders to bring this issue forward. And the second one is open contracting. This issue, we also see the nexus between open contracting with the issues of public participation. And as I mentioned before, particularly probably during other meeting, that public participation is the spirit of Indonesian ACWG presidency, because we try to engage as many as possible public participation, including from civil society, NGO, academia, think tank, and so forth. Having said that, we held a side event during our second meeting in Bali, and we have one of the panelists that we invite was from Open Contracting Partnership Indonesia. At that time, I recall that Ms. Nanda from Open Contracting Government Partnership Indonesia presented a transparency and the importance of transparency of data, and her I must admit that her presentation is one of the best presentation at that side event, and I think many anti-corruption ACWG members also recognize how valuable and great information that she gave. So kudos to Ms. Nanda, and we welcome more participation or more cooperation to push this issue forward as well. Also, apart from those two issues, allow me to comment on the issue of transparency and integrity of corporation. Even though this issue is not explicitly discussed during our presidency, however, the issue of transparency, integrity, and accountability in private sector has become one of the priority for corruption eradication in Indonesia, as well as this issue has been discussed in ICWG starting from 2014. So it's just because this issue is not part of one of the priority in Indonesia presidency doesn't mean this issue is not important, and we welcome the submission or the picking up of one of these issue as anti-corruption working group C20 priority, and we take note all the recommendation. And like Pak Dadang mentioned, that we do hope that this cooperation could continue sustainably in the future. Thank you so much. Pak Roy, probably over to you again if you want to say something.
Just would like to again thank our colleague from C20 since practically we are going to continue our collective endeavors in this particular format, especially since we from the G20 itself, we still have our third meeting later on September to be conducted perhaps maybe in Australia together with our co-chair. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Pak Roli and Bu Kartika, for responding to the C20 recommendations. From my understanding, there were at least 4 that we have agreed on, share intense concerns for the anti-money laundering and asset recovery issue, and then for the ultimate beneficiary ownership issue, as well as the energy transition and open contracting, and as for the transparency and integrity of corporations, even though it's not very well highlighted under the Indonesia presidency for the anti-corruption working group. The issue have already been discussed since at least 2014. So I think there is a shared concerns as well. So we obviously have opportunity to talk more about it in our next meetings, maybe during the next presidency under the India of the G20. And okay, thank you again for Pak Roli and Bu Kartika. I will give the next opportunity to Pak Haryanto Budiman to give feedback, response, and insight to the C20 recommendations. The floor is yours, Pak.
Yeah, thank you, Ibu Lola, and thank you, Pak Dadang, and ladies and gentlemen, for inviting me to this session. I'm representing B20, Business 20 Indonesia. We will have our summit on the 13th and 14th of November, just before the G20 meeting in Bali. I will not go through the slide one by one because in the interest of time. So I would just want to go to page 6, if possible. This is the executive summary of our recommendations. And as you can see from the slide here, there are 4 groupings. The first one is to promote sustainable governance in business to support ESG initiatives. The second one is to foster collective action to alleviate integrity risk. The third one is foster agility and counteract measures to combat money laundering and terrorist financing risk. And the fourth one is strengthening governance to mitigate exacerbated cybercrime risk. If you go into these four elements in a bit more detail on the policy action side, I think there are a lot of similarities from, with what has been mentioned from C20, but let me just go through it one by one. On recommendation number one, there are two policy actions. The first one is to improve sustainable governance measures. In here, it's about assessing the underlying sustainable governance enablers, for example, regulatory requirements and also their components, such as metrics compliance efforts that are applicable for business in various sectors. This will include initiatives to enhance diversity and inclusion, which helps broaden perspectives and further strengthen compliance efforts. The second policy actions related to optimizing sustainable governance compliance disclosures and monitoring. Here, we talk about ongoing efforts of integrating and standardizing sustainable governance by promoting and accelerating the adoption of a high-quality, globally converged and accepted sustainability reporting standard, and maximizing sustainable governance compliance monitoring and independent assurance initiatives. This includes the tools, the infrastructures, and governance. Ladies and gentlemen, in this particular area, we're talking about basically the standardizing the ESG reporting, because right now there are many different standards. It's quite difficult to compare one company versus another in terms of the implementation of ESG. ESG is not just about environmental, it's not just about social, but also involves governance, which is related to anti-corruption. The second policy actions, the second recommendations related to fostering collective action to alleviate integrity risks. We put down three policy actions related to that. The first one is cultivate and strengthen integrity through business-to-business collaboration. Here, we're talking about supporting and preserving integrity-based relationship to mitigate third-party risk. For example, with suppliers, with business partners, and also with customers, in order to ensure resilient value chain and supply chain networks. Second policy action is facilitate integrity in business to government interactions. Here, about upholding fundamental safeguards of integrity in accessing public services, even during crises or emergencies, when regulatory protocols are typically relaxed, and when providing economic incentives, including economy boost-driven stimulus package. The third policy actions related to promoting inclusiveness between public-private sector entities to ensure trust, transparency, and high standard of integrity. Here we're talking about areas related to SOEs and also with micro, small, medium enterprises, which is going to be a very important stakeholder for us to get themselves involved, because MSME would be challenging to implement something that is too bureaucratic and too rigid, right? Because we need to be cognizant of the challenge that MSMEs actually are facing. The third element related to money laundering. As we speak now, I think FATF mutual evaluation review is ongoing, and they've been interviewing a number of domestic stakeholders, and hopefully this will result in Indonesia joining FATF very, very soon. Here we talk about two policy actions. The first one is refocusing on money laundering, terrorist financing risk factors identification. Here it's about enhancing the ability and efficiency of money laundering, terrorist financing risk threats, identifications being driven as a result of impact of the new predicate crimes, emergence from the pandemic, and also increase in electronic communications and change in economic landscape. Refocusing should be risk-based. The second one, again, related to what has been mentioned before, which is beneficial ownership transparency. This is about improving data availability, supporting infrastructures, regulatory governance, and also collaborative work between parties and also between nations to maintain integrity in beneficial ownership transparency, while at the same time still respecting individual privacy expectations and rights. The fourth element is related to cybercrime risks. We believe in the new normal, whereby we have to be accustomed to working from home as well as working from remote locations. It's quite important to address the cybercrime risks as well, about the governance and also about extending multi-stakeholder cooperation. Why is this important from the business side? We believe that there are a lot of integrity issues that can result from cybercrime, from cyber attack. Right? They can steal personal information, they can steal financial data, which can be used for illicit activities. So the next slide is the summary, is the connection to what anti-corruption working group in G20 priorities are. In essence, it's not really in contradiction. We are actually aligned because many of the detailed policy actions from B20 can actually be mapped into priorities in ACWG. I think that concludes my presentation in the interest of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pak Haryanto Budiman, for the response and also the insights from the B20 ends. I think between the G20, B20, as well as the C20, we have a lot in common, a lot of similar concerns. The anti-money laundering, especially, have been mentioned both by the B20 as well as the G20, and also the data enclosure for ultimate beneficial ownership that is also mentioned and agreed upon the three of us, I think, the C20, B20, and the G20, and pretty specific from the B20 ends is the ESG format, the standardized one. I think that's an interesting and also important to be highlighted, which basically for the transparency and integrity of corporations from the C20 ends, it resonates with the B20. Thank you again, Pak Haryanto. And the next on our panelists list is Pak Wisnu Juwono, scholar and academia from University of Indonesia. Like the others, you have 5 minutes. Pak Wisnu, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Ms. Lola. And thank you for the C20 for inviting me as a scholar. It's been an honor for me to have this opportunity to give feedback in this distinguished forum. Perhaps because my recent research on renewable energy, I will focus more on the renewable energy, and perhaps I will complement with the other recommendations in C20. So I guess, as you already know, that the renewable energy will be the future sector, and we have identified that the forms of corruption in renewable energy, including the public spending for renewable energy, tender rigging, bribery, inefficiency, and mismanagement, theft, inflating the costs of developing renewable energy, and efficient allocation for public contracts. And we identified that number of stakeholders, important stakeholders related to renewable energies, including civil society, retailers, donor agencies, impact investors, government bodies. So I think in line with recommendations by C20, we would like to emphasize first on the regulation. So I think by banning or blacklisting company or institution that proven to be violated rules, especially regarding the corruption, collusion, nepotism in the renewable energy. And we also recommend the harmonization of regulation in support of anti-corruption policy related to conflict of interest in renewable energy. And of course, require project organizers to conduct feasibility studies on renewable energy. And we would recommend to build the capacity of asset apparatus at the central and local governments level regarding the assessment, budgeting, and decision making of the procurement of renewable energy. I think that's also in line with the recommendation of C20 in terms of open contracting. So in terms of transparency, in line with recommendation of C20, beneficial owner transparency and reporting of company politic activities is required. Creating transparency platform for renewable energies that can be accessed by the public, and applying rules for transparency renewable energy in order to form share responsibility in the project. In terms of public participations, we would like to recommend providing access to information and massively disseminate information to the public about renewable energy, and then public participation from upstream to downstream related to renewable energy project, and implementing rules on public participation in renewable energy. So I think that will be the recommendation that solely on the renewable energy. Yeah. So I think in terms of other policy, I think in terms of anti-money laundering, I think this issue has been discussed for decades, yeah. And the challenge is whether the legal infrastructure and the law enforcement agencies, especially between G20, have a same legal framework and same legal capacity. I think the inequalities on that aspect is the challenge, yeah, that create a loophole, yeah, in terms of, that's why it's difficult for some countries to confiscate the assets from those who corrupt. And then in terms of beneficial ownership, I think renewable energy will be the sector that needs to be focused on. And also, I think in terms of energy sectors, yeah, energy sector, that will be, I think, the priority for the G20's recommendations. And also in terms of open contracting, I would emphasize that, especially open contracting in public sector, yeah, especially in renewable energies industries, gas and oil industries, and military industries as well. Yeah, as you mentioned, yeah, United States, for example, the other advanced countries, they have military industries for a long time, and I think the issue of transparency has always been a challenge in that kind sector. So I think there's a couple of input from my side, mostly on renewable energies, and complementing from others' recommendations within the C20. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pak Wisnu, for the inputs as well as the recommendations for the G20, especially certain issues or sectors need to be prioritized, especially in the energy sector, including the oil and gas. And also the last one is the military industry, which also should be prioritized. And I think that one of the challenges that was highlighted by Pak Wisnu was about the gap or the difference legal infrastructure between countries, which can be challenging. And I think that is also worth mentioning for our next meeting or any other events that allow us to have direct discussion and provide recommendations. Yes, and also the conflict of about the conflict of interest in the energy sector. I think this, if the fossil industry or the current energy sector, which is heavily rely on coal industry, is brought, like the bad side of it is still brought to the transition to the renewable energy, that will also be jeopardizing the idea of transitioning to the renewable energy. So thank you for bringing that up, Pak Wisnu. And we are moving on to our online panelists. Next we have Mayra Martini. Mayra, can you hear us clearly?
I can hear you. I hope you can hear me and that you can see me well.
Yes, we can. Okay,
Thank you.
Mayra, I will be handing over the floor to you. You have 5 minutes. The time is yours.
Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for the invitation. I'm here speaking on behalf of Transparency International, and it's really a pleasure to be talking to you all today. Thanks also for the Anti-Corruption Working Group for really making the time and hearing from pro-civil society, which is really important. So I want to take us back to the initial where we started the conversation, that is to talk a little bit more about anti-money laundering, and in particular, beneficial ownership transparency. It's good to see that the issue remains on the agenda, but maybe what I want to try to demonstrate today is a little bit of the urgency and a little bit of how we see the G20 could be playing a greater leadership role in this topic as it has played in the past. And I say that because in 2014, when the G20 implement or release the high-level principles on beneficial ownership transparency, it was something really, really important to put the issue on the agenda. It made a huge difference on how the debate moved from that point on. And we, since then, have done 2 analyses of how G20 countries have implemented those high-level principles, one in 2015 and one in 2018. And we saw that from 2015 to 2018, there was some movement, and you could see important change in many G20 countries. But what we have seen since then is a little bit of a stagnation. You have now important commitments and measures being taken by some of G20 countries, but you also have a significant number of members who are lagging really behind when it comes to the implementation of the standards. And even more so, if we consider recent developments at the global level with the review of the recommendation of 24 of FATF, as just was already highlighted by the colleague earlier today, which now established that every single country that is committed to the FATF recommendations will need to have a beneficial ownership register in place or an alternative mechanism that fulfills the same purpose. So it would be really important that, I think, 2 things. One is that all G20 members adopt this minimum standard, no? And then that the G20 takes a step further and continues to show leadership on this issue by making sure that the registers that are in place or are being implemented are the best registers it could exist. And I will go a little bit in more detail on some of the recommendations of what needs to happen then to ensure those registers are effective and they can fulfill its purpose. That is, so authorities are able to detect, investigate, prosecute corruption, money laundering, and other types of financial crime. Also, I think it's worthwhile mentioning that the same high-level principles, this one I'm talking about, includes one specific principle related to the gatekeepers of the financial sector, which includes the legal profession, a focus now of the Anti-Corruption Working Group. And back then in 2014, G20 countries had already committed then to regulate the legal profession, making sure that they would, in their countries, they would be required to conduct due diligence, identify the beneficial owners, report suspicious transactions, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, this is also still missing. It's something that not all G20 countries have taken the step to do. And then, of course, there are the challenges related to supervision, which is, it's great to see that that's going to be a focus. And there, in particular, areas that I think it deserve a lot more attention are related to the supervisory framework. So which body is actually responsible for supervision? We have seen many countries opting for a self-regulatory approach, meaning that professional associations, in the case of the legal profession, so bar associations, would be responsible for supervising and overseeing the profession. And this has not worked very well in most countries for different reasons, from conflict of interest to ensuring the necessary resources are there to undertake these tasks. This has led some countries to set up a additional supervisory system. So basically an authority that would supervise the supervisors, which seems a little bit like not necessarily the best use of resource. So this would be something that I would be interested in seeing how the anti-corruption working group will be approaching. But going back to the issue of beneficial ownership transparency. So I see maybe we could divide G20 in two big groups. One group that needs to take the basic steps of ensuring a multi-pronged approach is in place, meaning we have a register, we can rely on existing information that is there compiled by obliged entities and the whole range of obliged entities then required to collect this data. And you have the company approach, meaning companies need to understand themselves, their ownership structure, and make that information available upon request. So this is the basic, this is what we need to see immediately across G20 countries. And then there is a group of countries that have already registers, have already these three different approaches in place, but needs to take steps to improve their framework, improve in a way that would enable not only anti-money laundering authorities or anti-corruption authorities, but also those working on the extractive industry, on public procurement, on political party campaigning, to be using this data, no, to detect potential issues. And the ways that we believe that these registers and these systems could be strengthened start with ensuring that there is an adequate beneficial ownership definition in place, and that there is a good understanding of the risks posed by the different legal vehicles. Countries should not go ahead and just adopt a definition using a 25% threshold that has been the standard without really understanding what are the legal vehicles operating in their country and what type of risks they bring. So the definition needs to be targeted. The definition needs to take into account the risks posed by different companies. Another important gap here that needs to be closed is related to foreign ownership. So in many countries at the moment, you would have registration requirements when it comes to companies being incorporated in a country, but a foreign company set up somewhere else that doesn't have any transparency in place could still come to your country, purchase real estate, get involved in public procurement without having to disclose the beneficial owner. And that's a gap that needs to be also closed in countries where it exists. And then there's the issue of quality of information. So verification is crucial in ensuring that the registry authority has the powers, the resource, the mandate to undertake checks, to conduct audits, and so on, is also really, really, really crucial. And then there is the issue of direct access by competent authorities. We need law enforcement, financial intelligence units to be able to search freely on these registers, ideally download the data, cross-check with other data sets. That's how we will improve detection of crime. That's also how we can improve asset tracing and measures that could lead to asset recovery, for example. And then the importance of making this data available to the public. We have a list of case studies that I'm happy to share with you all, demonstrating the impact that having this information available to the public beyond authorities can have, from improving policy to detecting case to ensuring adequacy of the information or contributing to verification of the information. And then finally, the issue of sanctions and enforcement. We know of countries, for example, where submitting false information is punishable, but not submitting information has no sanction. So it creates zero incentive for companies to actually comply with obligations. So making sure that your sanction and enforcement regime is strong, has teeth, and that you have a system that can be trusted then by those stakeholders that are working on it. So I'm concluding here, happy to answer any questions. I think really important would be to see the anti-corruption working group actually helping G20 countries to develop a plan to put those principles really to action there, to see those registers being implemented and used, and then we're going to start seeing, I think, a lot more happening when it comes to asset tracing, asset recovery, and so on. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayra, for the inputs and response to the C20 recommendations. There were 2 points that I wrote down here. The first one is that all G20 members should adopt the ultimate beneficial ownership data enclosure standard. And also for the second one is about the gatekeepers or legal enablers, where the bar association, for example, or notary association should be involved and serves as oversight entity for the members. Also, the one thing that have been mentioned by all the panelists, but I missed to rephrase it, is the transparency, the ultimate beneficial ownership information be available to the public, while at the same time not compromising the rights to privacy. So I think that is also an important thing that we need to work together and engage more, so that we can achieve that level of openness and transparency, again, without compromising the rights to privacy. So thank you again, Mayra, for your response. And we're moving on to Emmanuel Bria from EITI International. Can you hear us clearly?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Good.
Okay. Thank you. The time is yours, Emmanuel.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lola, and also thank you for the C20 Secretariat for inviting us from the EITI International Secretariat. So I'm speaking on behalf of the EITI International Secretariat. Short introduction, EITI is a multi-stakeholder initiative. We have now 57 countries who are members of the EITI. So apart from the governments who are committed to implement EITI standard, we also have companies and civil society groups taking part in the EITI. So it's a little bit like G20, B20, and C20. So it's a pretty much dynamic groups, so to say. So the key message that I'm trying to provide here, since EITI is not in the past not pretty much working closely with the G20, but we recently invited by the Anti-Corruption Working Group to provide our inputs on the especially related to the energy and corruption in the sector. What I'm trying to basically, presenting here is about, since EITI already developed a standard, it becomes an international best practices in the governance of oil, gas, and the mining sector over the past 20 years. So it's more like comparing notes. What kind of standards that has been available in the EITI that could be useful for the G20 to develop its own standard, and also useful for the C20 as part of the discussion. And that is how I'm going to frame our feedback to C20 paper that is shared with us. So there are at least 4 policy priorities that would be relevant for the EITI. The first one, of course, like everyone discussed here, is about beneficial ownership. PO, or beneficial ownership, is one of our requirement in the EITI, requirement 2.5. And it means that once you become a member of the EITI, you are required to take steps to disclose beneficial ownership. So I think other international standards may not be stepping that far into publicly disclosing BO, but EITI has always been, because it's part of the effort to promote transparency of the BO. I think public accessibility has always been the key aspect of the BO. And then the second one, of course, on the open contracting or procurement process, licensing and license allocation has always been one of the EITI requirements. And of course, there are, a very relevant risk that we could discuss around granting licenses or undertaking procurement process, such as bribery, collusion or political capture, undue influence or absence of competitive process. So open contracting or open licensing, I think it's very important, and we basically support the recommendation of the C20 on this topic. But also we wanted to, also, expound on that. As part of the requirement in the EITI, we are also basically, required countries to open their own contract documents. And there is anti-corruption angle into that. The first one goes political capture, non-compliance with laws and fiscal regimes, and conflict of interest. So maybe that is something that, as part of the C20 discussions, and maybe for the long run or G20 discussion, that could be, part of the recommendations that you could discuss as well. And then the third one on the countering corruption in energy transition. This is relatively a new area for the EITI. But over the past 2 years, as part of our EITI board decision, we have been embarking on studies and also discussion with national stakeholders and also globally on how to use the existing standard or good practices like EITI or other international standards to counter corruption or to expose corruption risk in the as part of in the energy transition within the energy transition framework. And when we are talking about the energy transition, I think there are two things that we need to bear in mind. One is that energy transition still requires significant minerals, or so-called critical minerals, like nickel. Indonesia is very rich in nickel, but there's other critical minerals like cobalt in most part of the world, like in DRC in Africa or in some other countries in Latin America. So while we are talking about energy transition and moving toward clean and renewable energy, the need for these kind of minerals or commodities is still very important. So, I mean, the point that we are trying to make here is about the risk of fast-tracking process as demands are increasing or demands are higher for countries to fast-tracking, for instance, licensing process or creating legislation or laws, which is not going through the normal process where there is public participation in the process, there is a clear oversight mechanisms, etc. So I think there is a clear kind of risk that we, or C20 or G20, need to look into that as well. And I understand that the Anti-Corruption Working Group has, specifically working on tackling corruption in the renewable energy sector. And the second one, of course, is on the renewable sector. I mean, most of the work that we are doing is on the extractive sector, less on renewable. But I think there are still, good governance principles and practices that could be introduced in the renewable sector. Looking into that from the whole value chain, starting from licensing, how the contractors are taking place, looking at the role of the state-owned enterprises, what happened to commodity trading, payment flows, revenue collection, subnational payments, etc. So while we are talking about renewable energy, I think the whole governance kind of risk is still prevalent, and there are existing standards that we can use, like EIT or some other standards from OECD, for instance, that can be adopted to look into the sector very carefully. And then The other policy topic that C20 also discussed in the paper is on transparency and integrity of corporation. We basically support recommendations from the C20, and in the EITI we have company expectations. So there are 9 expectations so far, which we assess every 3 years, and there are at least more than 60 supporting companies are part of these, and basically, they are encouraged to meet this kind of expectations. And the most relevant expectation that I would like to share here is the expectation number 7, how to engage in rigorous due diligence process, publish an anti-corruption policy setting, how the company manages corruption risk, including how the company collects, takes risk-based steps to use beneficial ownership data regarding joint ventures, contractors, suppliers in this process. So yeah, I would like to end my feedback here to C20. We wish you the best for the journey and continue to engage with the G20 and beyond. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emmanuel, for your response as well as the insights for the C20 recommendations. Again, similar concerns, especially on the energy transition and renewable energy sectors, because it is also highlighted that basically the energy transition to renewable energy is basically a resourceful work, because while we are transitioning to the renewable energy, we are still utilizing minerals such as nickel. So I think that is also one of a reminder that there is also still mineral that will be used for the energy transition to the renewable energy. Also, what Emmanuel also highlighted was the betterment of the licensing, basically about the governance, both for the licensing and also contracting in the energy transition and renewable energy sector. Again, thank you, Emmanuel, for your input and insights for the recommendations from the C20. And now, since we are moving closer to 9 p.m. here in Jakarta, we still have around 30 more minutes to have a Q&A sessions. And for those joining us online, you can, maybe some of you have written some questions or response in the chat box. On the other hand, I also welcome the participants here joining in offline to give not only asking questions, but if you have any response or maybe any inputs or insights are also welcome. We still have, like I said, 30 more minutes. If you have any questions, please state your names and organizations and to whom does the question is addressed for. Is there anyone who wants to ask question either to Blair or to one of the panelists, or maybe even more, more than one panelist? If you have any questions, can anyone help to track? Is there any questions or response from the Zoom chat box? None from the online. Is there anyone here who would like to not only asking questions, but also if you have any response or insights or inputs to either the C20 or to panelists? Oh, please, Pak Roli.
Thank you very much, Lola. Apologize to take the floor again. I just want to, to take benefit of our collaborations with the representative of the C20. as mentioned by Emmanuel, when he mentioned about the issue of energy transition is something practically new. Actually, this is something that also mirrored in the G20, what they call it, forum. So practically, that's why actually at the beginning, it is our intentions from the Indonesian government to propose the possibility of having, or at least trying to propose some kind of high-level principle on the risk mitigations for possible corruption in the renewable energy sector. But at the end of the day, after further consultation with some countries that maybe at this particular stage not really comfortable with the direction that we are heading, at the end of the day, we agree that maybe at this particular stage, we are aiming for having some kind of background note for the issue of energy, renewable energy risk mitigations. So this is actually where civil society can play a role more. When we are talking about energy transitions, especially now, when we are talking about food security, energy crisis, and also financial crisis due to the recent global situations, it is clear that the name of the game later on will be energy transitions. So even though maybe at the global at the government forum, we are not really robust enough at this particular stage to talk about the possibility of making some kind of linkage between the anti-corruption efforts with the energy transition or renewable energy sector. I think civil society can play more role, and at least to keep the ideas to be there on the table. Of course, this is not something that can be considered sprint. This is endurance. This is marathon. That's why these are our expectations that maybe after Indonesian presidency, there might be some other countries, maybe possible chair in the future that might take up this issue even further with the help from all sectors, including the B20 and C20. That's only the additional from us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak Roli, for highlighting again about the renewable energy. The C20 or the civil society in general actually have an important role to play. One of the opportunity that we can use is the making of the background note for this particular issue and sector. So I think it is time to step further for the civil society to take role and promoting the renewable energy sector and issue. I would also like to again invite the participants online or joining on offline to either ask questions to Blair or the panelists, or just giving insights or additional recommendations to this session. Anyone? Or maybe Mas Ari can share about the ultimate beneficial ownership compliance in Indonesia, because I think it has been mentioned several times, and I know Publish What You Pay Indonesia pay a very close look in that area. So I think maybe just to give us insights of how far have we gone since we have the presidential peraturan presiden, presidential decrees. How far have we gone? Maybe you can share with the floor, Mas Ari.
Thank you very much, Chair Co-Chair, also B20, Pak Wisnu. I think I will highlight several points. I think first thing that the important things, anti-corruption working group G20 not only produce commitment, but also how to make sure that this commitment will be implemented. So I think we have to discuss regarding accountability report and how to make sure the implementation. I think sometimes this is not highlighted in all of the meeting, all of the delegation, just only on this report. But I think this is important how civil society, G20, B20, and other engagement groups to monitoring the implementation of our commitment. Particularly, for example, this year, all of delegates agree with the high-level principle on role of audit and how to make sure that role of audit will be implemented in all of the country. I think one thing how to collaborate in the context of implementation of all of the commitment. And the second one, and if we talk about the energy transition, I think this is very important because energy transitions not only change the energy from the fossil fuel to the renewable energy, not only change the technology, but also this give impact to the economic diversifications, transformation of economic, also impact to another topic. For example, Indonesia have to learn regarding biofuel. Transition energy give impact on the food security. So I think it is important that energy transition not only we talk about the fossil fuel, but also economic diversification and etc. And we have to make sure that energy transition. So we call just energy transition. The definition of just energy transition is if the just energy transition is without corruptions. So I think it is important. Then I also discussed with Pak Wisnu, also with other colleagues. It is important to how to know the value chains of commodity, or value chain of the renewable energy from the supply side, from the upstream until downstream. Corruption impact assessment for all of the value chains, I think it is important. And one of the we in the civil society, we usually discuss about the conflict of interest. I think it is important things, not only in Indonesia, but also in the global context. I think if we know the value chains, whatever the value chain, I think all of the value chains have a potential corruption. So I think risk mitigation, and because this is in the first step on background notes, I think we have to develop and improve in the context of renewable, because we talk about the future. Regarding biotransparency, yes, we appreciate particularly from the Indonesian governments on this 1st July that the Ministry of Law and Human Rights disclosed the beneficial ownership data, but it's still the first step because several notes in our data BO and how to use the data, how to verify the data, because the government said that this data still from the company, but the government didn't verify this BO data. I think our important thing how to verify the data and how to use the data and how to exchange the data, not only the government to the government, but also in the internal of government. I think it is important in the context of biotransparency. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mas Ari, for the additional response, also inputs. I am receiving a message from the committee. Apparently, there's a question or response from the Zoom, but from Sanjita said, sorry, I am outside and not ideal to turn on my audio. My only comment on the energy transition is that during consultation with civil society on the issue, there was agreement that the corruption risks from the energy sector will not be entirely different from existing corruption risks in other sectors as well. So while the G20 looks more in detail for specific risks, it does not need to reinvent the wheel. There are existing standards like the EITI that can be adopted for better resource governance. Okay, is there anyone who wants to respond to the comment from Sanjita? Maybe, okay.
Yeah, I assume that in Indonesian case, the energy transition issue also should take a look about the fossil fuel interests, because sometimes from their side they are offering a false solution, such as coal gasification that might be not quite efficient economically. So I mean that although the renewable energy sector is also has a similar risk to the towards corruption, but we should also take a look an undue influence from the fossil fuel companies that tries to continue or expand their business by conducting greenwashing, etc. And as for the B20 policy actions, it's also interesting because C20 and B20 have many similar interests, such as beneficial ownership transparency. So it is good that there is a critical mass in the B20 which supports the beneficial ownership transparency. So it means that from the private sector itself that needs to declare their beneficial owner, they already realize that it is important, especially from the banking sector, I assume. And also, it's also interesting that the B20 also supporting the private sector transparency on the policy section 2.1 regarding cultivate and strengthen integrity through B2B collaboration, so that they will only choosing the right supplier who has an anti-corruption program which is similar to the companies itself. So, I mean, it's good that the B20 also realized that anti-corruption is an integral part of their businesses. That's all from me.
Okay. Thank you. Didi, I forgot to ask to introduce yourself first. So maybe you can reintroduce yourself to the floor here. Also,
I'm Didi from Transparency International Indonesia.
Okay, thank you, Didi. Okay.
Just one important thing that for the country like Indonesia and other countries, we have several initiatives like EITI, also OGP, UNCAC. So I think we could use this initiative to, for example, in the EITI, Mas Bria said that they also have concern in the context of energy transition. In OGP also concern in the open contracting and beneficial ownership transparency. And I think it is important how to link the commitment with the this several initiative, and how we use several initiative to make sure the implementation of anti-corruption working group G20 commitment, I think.
Thank you, Mas Ari, for reminding us that there are actually several other initiatives that basically are related to one another in terms of concerns and focus issues. So maybe it is also important to engage with one initiative to another to support our recommendations and also concerns. I see one. Is there a message in Zoom? If there is none from Zoom and from the offline participants, I think we can conclude our session, the Anti-Corruption Working Group of the C20. Thank you very much for Blair. Is Blair still joining in with us? Blair, thank you so much for the presentation, for the opening, and also to our panelists, both online and offline, Pak Roli, Bu Kartika, Pak Haryanto, Pak Wisnu, Maira, and also Bria. Thank you all for coming online and offline. I hope to see you all soon, and take care. I'm concluding. Oh, okay. We have 14 people online and also 40, 40 online, and then maybe around like 18, maybe, yeah, here in offline forum. Again, that concludes our session here. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues that have been joining since the beginning up until this time. I hope we all have a good rest. It's been a long day and it's getting closer to weekend, so I hope we can take care and stay healthy. Thank you. Oh, photo session. Oh, okay, yeah. We have a photo session with the panelists. Di mana? Oh, oke. Okay. Di mana? Di sini? Oke. Okay. Ya. Satu peringkat selesai. Jadi kita mengarahkan ke menyaksikan. Saksi itu pasti saksi yang memberatkan. Saksi manfaat. Panelisnya ada satu aja, Pak. Apa Pak? Jadi memang pace-nya harus disesuaikan sama layarnya nasional internasional. Kalimantan Timur. Kalau kita Kalimantan Timur,